I hereby call to order the special Board of Education meeting for Tuesday, March 11, 2014 at 7 p.m.
Mrs. Barker? Here. Mrs. Hauk? Here. Mr. Mobley?
Here.
Mrs. Nelson? Mrs. Tegmeyer? Mrs. Volante? Mr. Gilman?
Here. Please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, before we jump into the thing, I wanted to add a couple of comments talking about why we're here today. Back in December, we had a presentation from the teachers who put a ton of effort in kind of giving the current status of where we were with Common Core implementation and alignment. And quite frankly, we thought it was a great job done, but we still had questions because the district at earlier stages had represented to the community that we were fully implemented and fully aligned. And we wanted to understand if that was a true statement, and if it wasn't, how far do we have to go to get there? And the focus of today's meeting is to understand where we are. Are we fully implemented? Are we fully aligned? And if not, then we need to spend some time talking about how we're going to get there. The PARC tests are upon us. We're looking at a year or less before we start taking the new round of testing. And ultimately, the goal of this board is to make sure our students and our kids are in the best possible shape to take those tests. And so I appreciate everybody coming out on a Wednesday, especially in late notice. To fellow board members, thank you for Tuesday, sorry, 4/7. Thank you very much for spending an extra meeting for this. Also, too, wanted to thank both Ms. Winters and Ms. Tribby for your time and coming out to join us as well. One thing I did want to make a note to the teachers as well. I know the audit process was not an easy one. Audits rarely are, and I do appreciate your patience and indulgence as we went through that process. It's not meant to be punitive in any way. I know it's a tough process, and it's not always friendly process, but it's something that needed to get done to make sure the board is understanding where we are and how far we have to go to get the kids ready. So I do appreciate everything you guys have put into it, and I do apologize if we created hurt feelings or whatever along the way, but it was one of those steps we had to go through, so I apologize now for that, but also thank you for your input and the time you spent with everybody along the way, so thank you for that. So having said that, we'd open it up for open forum. That's anybody from the community, please.
We all know who's talking, right?
Hey, please introduce yourself.
So I do have my documentation. I'll pass that around. Erica, you can make sure that goes in the board packet or minutes. And then if anyone else is interested, feel free to take one. And because I don't like to be...
Sharon, can you introduce yourself for the record?
Erica, Sharon Rack. I don't like to be perceived as the uncooperative mother. I am actually a very supportive mother. And I am going to start, everybody, because I could have went on, but I thought I'm going to make this short and sweet and to the point. So you have the packet right now, and I call it the Common Core Timeline. This provides an overview of my frustration due to the misleading message from the district about our state of alignment to the Common Core standards. So everything is a copy and paste from board minute meetings and or letters that were sent home. You can all read that for your enjoyment. And then I would just like to say, my name's Sharon Rack, and I am a Common Core consultant for the Illinois State Board of Education, the Illinois Principals Association, and numerous other school districts throughout the state. Most importantly, though, I am a parent in the district, and I also feel that I'm not just an advocate for my daughter, but for all the children that live in this district. And I am going to start by, when things come home, most parents would be like, oh, that's great. But I read things like, oh, in 4th grade, operations of decimals are now there. And I say, no, that's a 5th grade standard. So a lot of this paperwork that goes home, the average parent would not be able to judge and evaluate, but I am. And so I'm going to again say, who's responsible. I think it's everybody in this room. And so, as the school board meeting, and you'll see the very first one, July of 2010. A parent stood in this very room as we were writing assessments. And they had actually asked the question, are we considering the Common Core state standards when creating these assessments? There was a blank stare from the school board and an eye roll from our superintendent. You know, this begins my frustration as we're now going to be rewriting assessments again. So I say the parents of the school district 107 have been misinformed and lied to over the last 4 years, resulting in a school district that's further behind in our Common Core implementation than we are led to believe. Our children's education is suffering and someone needs to be held accountable. And by that, I really think it goes back to knowing what the standards are, knowing how they look like with rigor, and based upon, and I will say, not just what my daughter brings home, but I do collect math papers from the neighborhood, so I have math papers going from kindergarten through 8th grade that, I mean, I could do my own item analysis about. We still stick to procedural concepts. I still feel our kids do not have this balance of application, and I definitely see very little conceptual understanding taking place, and that will all be assessed on the park assessment. So the next thing I would like to say is, in the timeline, you'll see the district agreed to aligning the Common Core standards, and 2 months later, you'll see we were done. That was the message that was put out there. 2 months later, we're done. You know, I know, and everybody knows that no district can do it in this amount of time, and I mean, I've been known to say, you know, on the P3, that curriculum change is at least a 3-year ongoing process. I mean, we're constantly learning new things all the time. And I also said on the P3 that till the actual park assessment is out, you really can't judge your curriculum. We need to see that first park assessment. And the next thing then, I feel that in the letters you'll see the district, they minimized the amount of work that was necessary to become Common Core lines. You know, it was quoted as there was minor changes. You know, anyone, again, who has studied the Common Core knows that there's major shifts happening right now. The school board, you approved Dr. Freddie Stork's goal for being Common Core lines. I think that was a hasty decision. The teachers, in December, I heard you say, all we need is time. But when the audit started, now we want PD. I'm a little disappointed in you as well, and I know her and Jenny, because I'm going to use your quote. We have minor, no, you don't want to quote this one. You stated, it's clear that the Pleasantdale curriculum has, with minor exceptions, are aligned to the Common Core standards. That's true why we need 20 more days of PD.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. With that, we'll move on to the next section of our agenda, which is item 4, reports and discussion items. Section A, the superintendent's report, and then the Common Core math audit report. Ms. Jenny Winters, could you please give us a quick summary of your report?
Do you want to pick up the?
Yeah, if we don't have to write projection.
Where do I? Oh, for the projector? I'm a visual person. Do you need the table? Erica, does she need the table?
Yeah.
Is it important? Minor delay, sorry. I will say that I went through probably hundreds of pages that you sent me. And there's a few things that I will show you some evidence of. So first of all, one of the first things I looked at was the report cards, because that's the first communication to parents. And the report card evidence they have is that these are your report card statements. I just want to go through a few grade levels. They're not really aligned to the rigor. Although they have some of the same topics, the alignment to the rigor is not quite the same. For example, grade 1 is really the focus in grade 1 is on addition and subtraction with a particular focus on problem solving structures and unknowns in all the locations. And there's no mention of the unknown locations or the different structures in your outcomes, which this is one of the most crucial pieces of the first grade. So I would recommend that you add that in, because otherwise we're not communicating the level of rigor that the standard is called for. Also, the Common Core omits money from grade 1. The reasoning behind that is that students in kindergarten and first grade really they don't understand, they don't have a sense of what we call value. That, for a kindergartner, 1 is 1. For a first grader, one item is one item. They don't understand that that item can have a value greater than 1. Usually developmentally, that's toward the end of first grade, beginning of second grade, where that light bulb will turn on, and something can have a value greater than 1. So because of that, they move that money expectation to second grade, where that light bulb is on, and it makes no sense to them. So we wouldn't want to do that in first grade. They can do it, but they don't understand it until that light bulb is on. And so age-appropriate developmentally, that's why they move that expectation to second grade. The 1.4 and 1.5, those are part of the standard, but those are not the full standard. And they're definitely just procedural pieces of the standard where you really want, the big push in first grade is this idea of the concept of addition and subtraction and how addition and subtraction represent all these different types of situations. So we're missing a lot of the big ideas. Also, 1.8 omits the whole idea of the concept of adding and subtracting two-digit numbers. We don't add and subtract two-digit numbers without manipulatives or pictures at first grade level because of that sense of value that isn't solidified. So that is done at the second grade level. Here's another grade level just to look at your outcomes. And a few things that I noticed in here. Third grade expectations don't limit multiplication to factors up to 10. That's a misconception that's quite common actually when we read that standard. It says, states multiplication within 100. So the problem like 15 times 4 would be included within this because it is within 100. So we don't want to have the misconception that we only do one-digit times one-digit factors. Also, grade 3 students do not understand probability because probability is supposed to be representing as a fraction, and they are just learning what a fraction is. So we don't study probability or temperature in grade 3, so we would want to remove those from our outcomes. One of the biggest topics of grade 3 is area as a major topic of study, and that is studied very conceptually in the third grade, where here in your outcomes you've only got it as calculating area, which is just the procedure of finding that. So we would want to make sure that we beef up the understanding part of area so that we get the full understanding of what that's about. And the connection between area and multiplication is one of those crucial ideas for third grade. So we want to go through that slowly and make sure that they have that deep understanding. Another example, fourth grade, you have included operations on decimals in fourth grade, where fourth grade is really the conceptual level of decimals. They represent decimals, they decompose decimals. The only adding of decimals that they do is what they call decimal fractions, where they think of tenths and hundredths being added together to have a deeper understanding of the value of the decimal. So the way you've got it stated here, it looks like they should be adding and subtracting any decimals, and you'll want to clarify that because that's not what that expectation is about. Also, you kind of have missed the study of the place value system. Fourth grade is one of those times where the two ladders of development really kind of merge together. And we look at the understandings of multiplication and division coming into play with our understandings of place value. So that hinges on this idea of what we call multiplicative comparison. That they have to understand multiplication as times as much so that they can understand place value as 10 times as much. And that's not mentioned anywhere in your outcomes, and that's one of those pivotal expectations that we wouldn't want to omit. So I think those are the kinds of things parents need to understand why you're doing what you're doing. We want to include those on the report card so parents have a better understanding. Also, we don't do range, median, and mode. That kind of statistical analysis isn't done until 6th grade, when they're a little bit more ready to tackle those representations and outliers and looking at it from a much more statistical advanced point of view. So that they study statistics and variability, measure central tendency and variability at that level, and that's where we want to move that to. But they do create line plots, which you have. Where's your expectation on line plots? You have them interpreting a line plot, but you don't have them creating a line plot, which is, I evaluate park items, and I probably should, never mind. Basically, what you need to know is that they need to be able to create a line plot. That's the standard, and park will assess it that way, that they can create it that way. So, let's see, 5th grade. A couple of ones that just jumped out at me. 5th grade, we do not graph functions in 5th grade. What they do is they study 2 different rules that could be presented in either a table form or a graph form, and they would compare them by plotting the points in the coordinate plane. They would look at those 2 rules, but those are not considered functions at that time. They really study function in 8th grade, so that's misplaced. Also, there's a big missing piece to 5th grade. 5th grade really has an in-depth study of volume. And they do it very conceptually, where they understand cubic units, and it relates to exponents and powers. And so that fundamental concept isn't mentioned at all in your outcomes. So we would definitely want to add that in, because we want to communicate how important volume is at the 5th grade level. 6th grade, something that jumped out at me was you do not solve inequalities in 6th grade. And that's included in your outcomes, so we want to modify that. They actually graph inequalities on a number line diagrams, interpreting those graphs in the context of the real world, so that they understand what an inequality represents. They're studying it much more conceptually, and the way it's presented here is very procedural. Also, 6th grade do not really study prime factorization as such. They study the greatest common factor in order to understand the use of the factors in the factoring of expressions when they apply the distributive property. So it's not the procedure of just prime factorization. It's really the concept of the distributive property and how it's applied. So that's a misalignment that we would want to fix also. Looking at your 8th grade, they do not classify or perform operations on polynomials in 8th grade. That is actually in, depending upon whether you're in the traditional sequence or in the integrated sequence, it would either be a Math 2 objective or an Algebra 1 objective. But that wouldn't be a typical 8th grade objective. And actually, the study of polynomial functions is further on in Algebra 2. So that the way that this is stated is a little confusing, that's not appropriate for an 8th grader. They really are studying the function level, the heavy study of what a function is and what makes something a function, and whether it's linear or not linear. That's really the focus in 8th grade. Again, it's much more conceptual, and this is much more procedural the way it's laid out. So we want to correct that as well. Something else I noticed, to be truly aligned to the Common Core State Standards, you need to have some kind of a mention of the mathematical practices, because there's 2 sets of standards that we have. And I don't know, I didn't see any evidence of the mathematical practices in any of the documents that I was looking at. So they're not in the scope and sequences, they're not in the mastery learning outcomes, they're not mentioned in the assessments. However, I do see some signs of the mathematical practices in the assessments. When you're asking students to explain, that would be math practice 3. So you can definitely say that you were doing some of them. You just need to articulate that, because teachers would have a hard time communicating that to parents if they don't have a way of tracking that. So in your master learning outcomes, you would want to include the mathematical practices, and those would be at every grade level. They may look different at every grade level, but they need to be mentioned at every grade level. So I didn't see any evidence in any of the documentation of them. Scope and sequences. The scope and sequences that I received were all basically, here's our textbook and here's how we're going to use the textbook. And when I asked the teachers how they determined the scope and sequences, they basically said that they used their textbooks. That's the resource that they had. So, but some of the other documents that really much more benefit the development of the scope and sequence would be the Park Model Content Frameworks, or the Park Evidence Tables, or the progression documents, which I was hoping to hear when I was interviewing teachers. And I don't know whether teachers were unaware of these documents or whether they just didn't use these documents. But those would be the 3 key documents that we used in developing the ISBE model curriculum. Those are, you want to be aligned to Park, obviously, and so those documents really help you to align to the level of the scheduling of Park, etc. So as you consider revamping, I would definitely look at those 3 documents. When we look at the scope and sequences, there's, I would call it a lack of focus and coherence. And here's an example of that. In kindergarten, when we talk about focus, it means that you're going to zero in on certain topics, and this is just 1 month in kindergarten, and there are 10 topics to be addressed. That's a lot for a kindergartner to wrap their mind around. So we want to kind of narrow the focus to do a limited amount of topic in 1 month, and then do it repetitively in that month. And it's kind of a gradual build. Where when we look at coherence, it's not going to be coherence if you're hopping around quite as much. So although kindergarten is about a lot of repetitive practice, there should be more of a constructed design of which topics are going to be introduced when. So I think that could use a little bit of refinement. Also, in the very early in September, it's early to address addition and subtraction. They're not really going to understand addition and subtraction until they have a firm grasp of counting objects, counting groups, seeing groups. So I think that I would put that later on in the scope and sequence. Also, I might want to mention that there isn't a mention of those problem-solving structures that are introduced in kindergarten. So that's something we would want to improve to make sure that we have that communicated. That's a key feature of kindergarten, first and second grade. First grade, when we look at the scope and sequence, and again, I see that they are using the textbook program and the topics of the program. Some of those topics may not necessarily be written the way that we would want to use them in. For example, 5 and 10 relationships is actually a kindergarten expectation. I know it's in the program, but and during a transitional time, when you're transitioning to the Common Core, we are going to keep some kindergarten concepts in first grade until the kids are truly ready for them. But we would want to make note of which ones are temporarily being done in first grade, and which ones are permanently being housed in first grade. Addition and subtraction fact fluency is broken apart as combinations within 10 and combinations within 20. And the way your program has it, it's facts to 12 and then facts to 20, which isn't an exact match to the standard. So that's something that we may not want to do exactly the way that it's written in the textbook. Counting in grade 1 also includes counting by ones and by tens from any given number, and that's not really something that should be in isolation for 1.5 weeks. I didn't look through the textbook series, but when that's something that you kind of do in conjunction with other activities. So having a week and a half on one isolated skill, I can't imagine that would be very fun for the teacher or the students. I think we would want to do that embedded in with some other kinds of activities. Finally, you have money included. I know it's part of topic 13. I would not address money for that, and we mentioned that before. So that's one of the changes I would suggest. In second grade, topic 5, I was a little confused by this one. Topic 5, place value to 100 is a first grade topic, and I think we would want to make note again that that's a temporary one. I understand there's a lot of schools who are keeping it temporarily while they're transitioning to the Common Core. So you just want to make a note that we're going to do this for now, and then in the future when we are, the kids are more ready and they have gone through the Common Core as a kindergarten and first grade student, then we would have this disappear from our plate. So that's one that this is the scope, second grade scope and sequence, and it makes sense to keep it temporarily but not permanently. Another one that I noticed is that students, they don't add fractions in grade 2. They will take fractional shapes and subdivide them into halves, thirds, and fourths. So they're learning the language of fractions without the symbolism of fractions, but adding of fractions doesn't happen until 4th grade. So this is early for that. Third grade, a couple of the things I would note is probability. Probability is not in grade 3. I mentioned that before. And having it so early in the year, I understand some districts, try to do some things to enhance the curriculum and enrich. But you don't want to do those kinds of things early in the year because that's going to prevent possibly getting to some of the things that are assessed on HARC or assessed on the ISAT. The ISAT this year was 100% Common Core. So including probability early in the year meant that something that was on the ISAT didn't get addressed in time. So that's just it's too late now because you just took the ISAT, but I think that I would have pushed that later if you were going to do it at all. And then the work with lines, points, and angles, that is to be done in 4th grade. And again, that's earlier in the year because this is, I think, mid-year. That I probably would have, if you were going to address something that was going to be advancing, I'd push that later in the year as well. Because you don't want those topics that need to be assessed not to get addressed. Okay, this was, I was curious about this one. This was your above grade level sequence for 3rd grade. And it jumped out because actually I didn't highlight that, so I don't know whether you all were noticing something and making a change to this or not. But counting money and making change is actually a 2nd grade outcome, and it's in your advanced 3rd grade outcomes. So I didn't think that would be above grade level. In addition, even at odd numbers is in your above grade level, but that's also second grade. So something else that probably needs to shift elsewhere. And again, it's something that can stay temporarily, but we would want to make a note that it wouldn't be there permanently. Okay. Fourth grade, well, one of the other things in here is, oh, I'm sorry, this is not fourth grade. No, this is fourth grade. We have nets, okay? Nets are not actually addressed until sixth grade, and then volume is not addressed till fifth grade. And there's a really carefully constructed progression of this in the standards, so addressing this in grade 4 is very early. And the other thing is the range, median, mode. That is a sixth grade expectation. I mentioned that earlier, so I don't need to go into that. Looking at fifth grade, a couple things that need to change. They don't do order of operations in fifth grade. This is a really common misconception because it mentions parentheses, brackets, and braces. And what we actually want fifth graders to do is to understand how algebraic expressions and variables are used to represent real-world situations, and that the parentheses, brackets, and braces are grouping symbols to help us understand that every time we work that expression, we evaluate that expression, we should get the same result. So the grouping symbols cue us into the beginning of the order of operations, but we don't actually teach the full order of operations until grade 6. So the emphasis really here is how we interpret the world into math, into the language of math, and how we understand symbolism for mathematical language. So that one is definitely something that we need to shift. Sixth grade, there are a couple topics in here that I think are kind of way down below. One of those is adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing decimals is really supposed to be mastered in grade 5. And again, I'm sure that not everybody's there yet, and this is transition. So we would just want to make a note, again, this is one of those temporaries, and that in the future they wouldn't be on our plate, because that would be something that they would master by then. Also, it's a yellow standard in 6th grade because 5th grade should have spent quite a bit of time on this. So spending 4 weeks on it is an excess.
Explain a yellow standard.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yellow standard, the prioritization of the standards is, that you have a green standards are the highest priority, blue standards are a much lower priority, and yellows are even less priority. So yellow standard is the least, the lowest on the priority scale. So we don't want to give 4 weeks to one yellow standard. In the future, I understand this is transition still. And then finally, down here, the majority of these topics that are in fractions are actually mastered in 5th grade as well. The only one that should spend a little bit more time is the focus on dividing fractions by fractions or fractions with mixed numbers. So again, 5 weeks might be an excess in the future, where I understand this is transition now, but we again want to make a note of things that are temporarily here and then things that are disappearing. 7th grade, we have operations with fractions again, and if they don't have it, you're going to spend some time on it, but really the focus is on rational numbers, so it's not just on fractions, it's on positive and negative. So having this much time on operations of fractions is probably a little bit more than we would want. And then the study of ratios, rates, and proportions in grade 7 is really a major topic. And I would say that it would take more than 4 weeks to do that thorough study because it's a huge topic for 7th grade. That 7 RP3 standard is probably one of the most important standards in the book. So that one by itself could take 3 weeks. So just keeping in mind that 4 weeks is a little bit of a short time for that unit. When I look at the assessments, one of the key things is you have done a great job of aligning your items to the mastery learning outcomes, which many districts don't have their assessments aligned to their outcomes. But your mastery learning outcomes are not the same as the Common Core state standards. So the fact that you know how to align is a really big plus, where many districts don't. But the alignment the items will have to be adjusted because they're not the Common Core. They don't address all of the aspects of rigor, which are the three things listed here: conceptual understanding, procedural skill, fluency, and application. The majority of the items are on the procedural level, and so we need probably some guidance on how to make these more conceptual. So what I did is I went through one item per grade level just to give you a feel for what would Park do, because Park, I spent a great deal of time. In fact, I'm going to be evaluating Park items probably tomorrow and the next day. How do they look, and how do we prepare students in that Park way of looking? So, for example, this one, 4 frogs are in the pond, 4 frogs join them. How many frogs are there in all? A student really doesn't need to understand addition to be able to solve this because the picture is provided for them. So all they really need to do is count. So this is more of a counting exercise than it is an addition item. And they would be looking at recording the equation, which is part of what we are doing, but we actually learn how to record equations in kindergarten. So right now, this is more of a kindergarten item. But if we take the picture away and to remove a little bit of the scaffolding, some frogs are in a pond, 8 more frogs join them, and now there are 15 frogs in the pond. How many frogs were in the pond to start with? Show your thinking with a picture and the equation. So the student is providing the picture, and then we're seeing those mathematical practices coming to life a little better. So minor change, and I don't think it's going to be a big shift for you to adjust those. And now you're addressing Standard 101, which is probably the most important standard in the first grade book. So I think it's good to focus on that standard. We just need to make a little bit of an adjustment for it. Okay, second grade, here's one. Write the number sentence to solve. The red pencil is 7 centimeters long. The green pencil is 5 centimeters long. How much longer is the red pencil? As it's stated right now, this is a first, the use of units makes it second grade, but the number level is first grade level. So we would want to have them working within 100 to solve their problems. Well, right now we're within 20. It depends on what time of the year you're going to be doing this measurement unit. And your measurement unit is later in the year, so it's after your 2-digit addition and subtraction work, which would mean I would expect the measurement to be 2-digit addition and subtraction. So I would enhance that with Joseph and Tyler did the standing log jump. Joseph jumped 46 inches, Tyler jumped 6 inches further than Joseph. How far did the two boys jump all together? Now that is actually a 2-step problem, which is appropriate for second grade. Second grade does 1- and 2-step problems. And now you're addressing 2 standards in one, which is kind of nice when you can kill multiple birds with one stone. So, just a little tweak. Okay, third grade, this one says show the distributed property for the following array. Now, honestly, they don't have to know the names of the properties. They just have to use the properties in third grade level. So, I think we're trying to, and even the item says apply properties of operations as strategies to multiply and divide, and that's a perfect match to the standard, but they're not applying the property here. They're kind of supposed to know the name of the property. So we want to change that to find the area of the entire rectangle using the smaller rectangles, select which expressions could be used to find the area. And this is one of those select all that apply kind of items that Park loves so much, that would get kids used to finding more than one correct answer. And in fact, in the 3rd through 5th grade, they actually tell you how many are the right, where in 6th or 8th they don't. So that's a difference. Okay, grade 4, here's one, circle the benchmark fractions. Now, I didn't see a mastery learning outcome that was aligned to this one. I think we're trying to address this standard here, 4 and 2, where we're comparing 2 fractions with different denominators and different numerators and different denominators by creating common denominators or numerators or by comparing to a benchmark. So I think we're trying to approach this standard here, but really the item is asking for them to identify benchmark fractions instead of compare using a benchmark fraction. They're never asked to just identify a benchmark fraction because a benchmark is a commonly used fraction, and for kids who have more experience, they have more benchmark fractions than kids who have less experience. So there aren't certain fractions that are the only benchmark fractions, there are many. So instead, we would want to look at something like this, where Delia and Tara were comparing fractions. Delia said that 3/8 must be greater than 3/5 because 8 is greater than 5. Describe Delia's strategy. Now we're getting at critique of someone else's reasoning, which is math practice 3. It's a very hard one for kids to take on, but we need to give them lots and lots of experience with that. Tara said that she thought 3/5 must be greater than 3/8 because 3/5 is greater than 1/2. Describe Tara's strategy, who is right. So this is a part, you'll see this kind of thing as well. Here's one. I actually love the beginning of this, although that right now it's a 4th grade item. Estimate and compute the product of a fraction, and this is really 4th grade where they multiply a fraction times a whole number. But to make this 5th grade, we want to take it to the level of scaling, where they understand that when you multiply a whole number, a fraction or a number times a fraction, what happens to it, and when you multiply a number times an improper fraction or a mixed number, what happens to it? When you multiply by a whole number, what happens to it? So we would have them look at these to see which would be less than 8, greater than 8, equal to 8, that get at that concept of scaling. And this is really new to 5th grade. Most 5th grade teachers have had a challenging time with scaling. I know I know when we were looking at park items, we had to really rework some of these because they were not quite hitting the mark. Some of the vendors even had trouble making something for this item. So it's a challenging one. So, which is why I gave you an example of one, because that might help. But that's what we mean by scaling, which is in 5th grade. Now 6th grade, we have this one, locate a number on a number line, and actually, oh, sorry, I got a pump here. I think we're supposed to get it 6.6.1, but we're not really locating a number on a number line yet. But this one is comparing and ordering and using integers to represent quantities in real life situations. This one's not a real life situation, so we would want to enhance it that way. But I think actually we can fully address that standard in a little bit more detail by asking them to represent a series of numbers on a number line, and then having them complete expressions and describing real-world situations to represent each expression. The really big push in 6th grade is on absolute value. It's a huge standard, 6 and a 7. There's an A, a B, a C, and a D to it. And absolute value is probably a good chunk of time in the unit that you will do with integers. So I think we can enhance that by adding in some of those absolute value work. 7th grade, I actually really love this item. I think that I didn't make much of a change to it. Right now it's a 5th grade standard because it's looking at scaling. But all we have to do with this one is tweak it to make it into irrational numbers, and you've got a perfect item for 7th grade. So I love the item, just want to ramp it up a little bit. We were in our model, I mean, everybody has challenges with this because when we read 7th grade is kind of like everything is multi-step in 7th grade. Everything is also multi-step in 4th and 5th grade. It's just different kinds of numbers. So quite often we'll make a multi-step problem that's supposed to be 7th grade and we'll realize, well, we don't have anything negative in it or anything, so we have to ramp it up, or we don't have any rational numbers. Our 7th grade team just this past weekend was making something. I said, that's a wonderful item for 4083, but you have to have some fractions and decimals in it to make it a 7th grade item. So everybody has trouble with this one, but this one's not a major tweak. Just a little minor tweak, and it's a really great item. Okay, 8th grade. I didn't change this one a whole ton either. But this one, you're telling, the only real change I want you to make is that don't tell them it's a function, because we want them to figure it out in 8th grade. That here, we're giving them something, and I want you to tell me, first of all, write the equation to represent the situation, and then tell me if it's a function and how you know. Because that's really the analysis level. That's the conceptual piece that 8th grade is trying to get at. Is it a function? How do you know? Why or why not? And then, is it a linear relationship? How do you know? So they can have evidence to support it. So, yes, I do want them to be able to solve these, but I really want them to be able to interpret whether it's a function or a linear relationship. I think people's eyes just glazed right over on that one, but then we're getting a couple of 8th grade standards. So minor tweak, but it'll be much more like Park. So a few changes. I would say, an overall assessment is that I wouldn't say being partially aligned means you're not aligned because you're not done yet. There's a lot, and there's a lot of work to be done, but it's curriculum. Curriculum is like the laundry and it's never done. So as I look through the documents, and I will say that, I did go through them with a fine-tooth comb because I wanted to give you as much coaching as possible. There's a lot of good news. It's obvious that people have done a lot of work on this. But I think part of our challenge is that we really don't understand what those standards are saying some of the time. Because the standards they're not always human-friendly. They're written in a very confusing way sometimes. You really have to dissect them and look at examples of what they would look like. And then I think that helps make them a little bit more meaningful. So, okay?
Any questions from the board? Lisa, you want to go first? Kim?
I guess I don't really have a question much for Jenny. I want to thank you for your time. I guess my question is for Mark. We have a curriculum director, and it doesn't appear that they've been involved with math in the way that they may have been involved with language arts. Is there a reason for that? And can Nan help with this?
Well, we've got a lot going on with social studies, social studies with language arts, and so her time has really been focused on that. So that's why we recruited Fern and other consultants to help with the math, because we've also got Common Core English Language Arts, which is a very large task as well. So that's how we're approaching it. I think we've laid out a very good plan going forward in terms of what we're going to do and when we're going to do it, and who's going to be involved with it.
Questions?
No, I'm good right now.
Mark?
No.
Gina?
No, but thank you for your time. So I didn't spend a lot of time on it.
Just one quick question. I appreciate kind of the insights and kind of showing us where we have to go to. In your kind of professional assessment, how do you think this is a gap we can close before the full testing cycle starts next year?
I do. I think it's good. What really needs to happen is teachers need to have some understanding of the standards. And I
Okay.
think it's obvious that they've done a lot of work in this, but it doesn't seem like they were really guided to interpret the standards deeply.
Okay.
So
Good. Thank
that's a first start.
All right, thank you. All right. The next agenda item, we want to talk about what we're going to do to close that gap and what the next steps are. Ms. Kirby has been our professional development coordinator for math, or consultant for math for some time. And she's going to provide some context as to why we are where we are, and then help us walk through the plan, how we're going to get the full implementation. Right?
Good. First of all, the best job I have is I get to work with the teachers. And we've had 2 meetings so far. We met on January 9th, after the cold days of no school. And what they received on that first day was my part of when I looked at their math learning outcomes. And I just looked at quickly the content piece, you know, and how that, in my eyes, how it aligned to the Common Core, just the content piece. So each grade had received a piece of paper from me. I was real nervous when I gave it out because I didn't want to diss their work, because they worked hard. And on this piece of paper, it showed what was missing and what was not aligned. And an example of that would be 6th grade. The 6th grade teacher, just awesome, had on there that she's going to do everything there was about integers. What is an integer? How does it fall on the number line? How do you compute them all? And I said, well, why don't you just concentrate on what rational numbers are, what they are. Just teach the kids how to internalize the understanding of rational numbers. Leave the computation for grade 7. That's what the Common Core is suggesting. So the best part, I don't embarrass.
It's okay.
Okay, the best part was the next time we met, she said, I understand why my students have problems with the operations, because they didn't understand what rational number was. And now 7th grade is saying that this will give me time to spend to actually do the operations, but I'm not going to have to review and reteach. And how cool is that? And that's what professional development is all about. And that's why I have the best job. Sorry, Jenny. I just enjoy what I do. So in January, that's what we talked about. We looked at the alignment. They were given then a half day to go back and tweak and make those changes. And then in February was the mathematical practices. Now, when you look at the whole document for the Common Core, the very beginning of the Common Core, I believe the chair was it like 2 pages or 3 pages, are the practices. And then you have all the content stuff. So with its rigor and stuff. So we spent February 6th on the practices. And a good 2.5 hours. And it was a great activity. I hope it was great. I enjoyed it. Each person was given a practice to identify the verbs, identify the nouns, show the relationships. So then they created a poster, which I didn't invent this activity, I stole it, I borrowed it. And it was in this room, and we had the posters of the 8 mathematical practices all the way around this room. It was like wallpaper, it was awesome. So they had the opportunity to explain to the others what their practice was. And it was great. You know, their exit was that they began to understand. The other thing that they said, the teachers had said, is that they're doing some of this. They just didn't know what it was called. Now they have a phrase for it. Again, the best part of professional development is I get to kind of make that light bulb. It's like teaching a class and teaching students, and that light bulb goes on. So that was the 2 times I met with them, and I enjoy you guys. I love you. So the other part, when I look at the mastery learning outcomes, they're parent language. If the outcomes were written with the exact words from the Common Core, most parents wouldn't understand it. And then the report card, most parents wouldn't understand it. And so then, then how do you know if your student, if your child is really learning what they're supposed to learn? Because you don't get what they're supposed to learn. So that's my take on that. I look at curricular development. I gotta catch my breath here. Yeah, I look at curricular development. And here's a geometric symbol, an equilateral triangle, 3 congruent sides. And starting at the top vertex is deciding on, thank you, on what you want your students to know and be able to do. Then when you come down that equilateral triangle, the next vertex you come down to is how do you know you got there, the assessment piece. Yeah, there's always lots of work to do on assessment. You need to get it to at the meaning of it, but how do you do that? How do you word it? And guess what's on the PD list is writing, looking at the assessments. Then what resources do you need in order to be able to help your students be able to achieve what they need to achieve and to decide what they know? So it's that equilateral, equilateral triangle. Awesome. I mean, that to me is the picture of life. And the best part about curricular development is always in motion. It's always in motion. It's never done. It is just never done. And that, I like it. And of course I might be nuts, but I do. Future professional development. This came from the teachers and with some refinement from us. The teaching strategies. Claire Neinfeld's the other consultant that's going to be working with us. So what we're going to be able to do is next fall get into classrooms and observe, co-teach, demo lessoning, and also help with unit planning and lesson planning. Assessment writing, that's going to be huge, but we'll be able to do that. The sequencing of the topics and creating that big picture piece. What resources? Identifying the resources, and of course help Mark spend the district's money. Report card descriptors, lesson unit planning, curricular maps, assessment data. You can give all the assessments in the world, but if you don't analyze that data, it's not going to mean anything. The assessments help drive your instruction. Technology. The technology is out there. Your kids have grown up with technology. I'm learning the technology. I'm one of the old folks. But what technology is out there to help the kids engage in what they're learning? And then, of course, the park preparation. Here's a challenge that I have for every adult that's in here. If you go on, and I'm going to spell it out, PARCCONLINE, parkonline.org. Then in the search part, go into the computer type problems, release problems, and try that. Pick your grade level. It starts off with English language arts, which I would have problems with, and then goes to math, that part. And that would give you an idea as far as what your kids are going to be expected to be able to do next year. The ISAT's been like a moving target. And what I mean by that, 2 years ago, it was 100% with the Illinois, the standards assessment piece. Those were no longer the standards. Illinois back in, I think, August of 2012, had adopted the Common Core. So ISAT was assessing non-Common Core, non-standards that Illinois State had adopted. So in writing curriculum, you can't forget about that because that's how your kids are being judged. So they need to, they need to be taught, let's say, the operations of integers in 6th grade because that's on the ISAT. Last year, 20% of ISAT was Common Core. And this year it's 100%. So it's a moving target. So therefore the curricular development was moving, and it's always going to be moving. I'd like to close with one thing. Curriculum development, etc., is a living document. It's a living, breathing document. It's always changing. And the district is as a line, when I compare it to other districts that I work with, and I work with some high-performing districts. District 107 is pretty much at the helm of all those other districts. If I shared those stories, you'd be surprised. Now, does that mean that there isn't a district that's further ahead of District 107? Certainly. But that doesn't mean that District 107 has no clue. Okay? And that's my perspective. And teachers, I give you guys a round of applause. And thank you.
Can I ask you to expound on the one point I think is an important thing for folks to understand? Is we talked a lot about alignment in the days that you were here, an explanation of why we did things as we did. And over the 2 to 3 year period, there were a couple of factors that were important, but they weren't included in Ms. Winter's report. One was the thing you talked about where the ISAT was changing over a period of years, and we maintained those items because, as you mentioned, we were judged on those. But there was another point as well, is that when things were moved from one grade level to the next, then kids matriculated, say somebody was moved, that you talked about 6th grade to 4th grade, and then the kids in 4th grade moved up to 5th grade, we needed to have those transition years.
Absolutely.
And so those were also in there. But I think also the most important thing is that we made a concerted effort when we did our alignment that the language would be understood by parents.
Absolutely.
And that was a critical thing on the report card, that we truncated that language and didn't have the whole Common Core standard written out because of its, as Ms. Tribute mentioned, or Winters mentioned, they're complicated and not really understood by most parents. So when you go to our website, you click on the report card descriptors, it takes you to the outcome, and it also there gives the reference point for the Common Core standard. So, and that is how we aligned it. Now in the future, we may make adjustments in that, but I think that was a very important thing to keep in mind.
Absolutely. And the fact is, again, that, the whole purpose of teaching is preparing kids for the future and preparing them to be able to be successful in state tests, whether you believe in it or not, but that's how schools are compared, how kids are compared. And that was a moving target. From standards that the state doesn't even consider anymore. They call it the new Illinois standards, Common Core state standards for mathematics. But they're assessing the old ones. And then it became 20% of the new ones and 80% of the old ones. One of the things that we did, both in January and also in February, is that we looked at the PARC document. We looked at the priorities, and we identified the clusters that were considered as, spend 70% of your school year on. Those are your major clusters. And then what were the 20% of the school year should be spent on, and what should be the 10%, and what those colors meant. And that was an eye-opener also. That was one. We looked at the live binders to get an idea of how to group things. Jenny is a facilitator for that for the state. So that also gave them another idea of how to group the different content and group the standards. We did a lot within 2 days. Wow, I would have been walking out of here going, oh my gosh, I'm glad I'm part of it. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I have one. Maybe we talk about this more in communication as well, but you made the comment that most parents wouldn't have understood the report card using the Common Core terminology. I can't believe we're the only district that's kind of struggling with this.
You're not. You're not.
How, and I'll ask both our esteemed guests as to how should we be approaching this? I mean, you run the risk of if you truncate or you kind of change it to make it more user-friendly, you may lose the essence of what you're trying to do, which I think we did a little bit. So the question is, how do we get the point across that we have aligned, that this is what Common Core is? how do we communicate that to the parents?
Right. I think, you know, a couple different ways. Now, I'm just talking for Tribute Talk.
Right.
With the work that I'm doing in some other districts. I think when the assessments are written with the rigor, how many of us remember Bloom's taxonomy from college? Now it's called depth of knowledge, and I believe Park is using depth of knowledge.
Actually, it's a cognitive complexity framework.
Did they switch it up?
It's more complex than the.
All right. Anyway, higher order thinking skills. So looking at those assessments, that would be one way of where the parents can see what's expected of their students. When you look at the report card, one district that I'm thinking of in particular, which happens to be where my husband and I live, they're struggling with the descriptors. You know, it's like, how do you show the conceptual understanding? How do you state conceptual understanding concept in a few words on a report card where parents would be able to fill in the blanks? You know, I don't know of any district, you know, I don't know if Lyle has that set. You know, I think the districts in general are really struggling with it. That's a great question.
Right.
Johnny, how would you
deep can
approach
we
that?
go in a report card, just staying on that topic for a second, how deep can we go in a report card? I mean, let's say that we sum it up for the report card, but it's a hyperlink. So we click on it, and then we pull up a supporting document that gives verbatim,
Right.
Right.
you know,
But I think it points to.
for those that want to read it.
I think it's a good idea. If it works technically, it's a good idea. I think the one thing I think we're missing is a shared vocabulary, both between the teachers, the parents, the administrators. I don't think we have absorbed or internalized the Common Core vocabulary.
Right.
And then we got to figure out how to put that out. Hyperlink's a good way to do it, but I think it's education, it's training,
Absolutely.
it's, you know, it's sessions like this, maybe not with the board, but, you know, more. I think this was Jenny, your thing was great, putting up the actual examples for how we got there, where we need to go. It's great as well. But I think that's the kind of thing our parents need to hear. They need to understand what they mean by the three elements of Common
Right.
Core, right? What are the three different aspects of it? And how does it relate to my third grader? How does it relate to my sixth grader, to my eighth grader, and so forth?
The whole part of parent education, that's got to be in place also. I'm going to go back to the district that my husband and I live in. I did a workshop with some parents, and I was told ahead of time that you know, the parents aren't going to understand what you're saying. Well, after we went through a lesson, we went through a full lesson, and we chose 5th grade. It was a K-8 building, but we chose 5th grade, and when we got done with that lesson, parents came up and said, I get it. Now I have an idea of what my student, what my child's coming home with. So I think through parent education, through the PTA, PTO.
Oh, sure. Do you have a perspective?
What people don't have report cards? Usually my recommendation is going back to the language of the standards, use the cluster descriptors, but those are more comprehensible for parents. Those are the bold statements that that these standards are numbered below. And then they have sometimes another document that they link to that further explains that with a little bit more detail. Generally, what districts do is they may have student-friendly learning targets, but the teachers always use the standard language. They don't use the truncated language. And that's a strong recommendation that I have, is we always want the teacher to refer back to the actual language of the standard, but students and parents can have student-friendly learning targets, because that's what's friendly for them. Teachers need to have that natural language from the actual standard.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other questions? I'm sorry, I got dominated.
No, it's okay. Frank, can I ask you a couple questions? When I was reading through, I think it was your February 6th report, and one of the things you said in here was that it looked like teachers were implementing some of the feedback on their written content curriculum. Who, when you're not here, is reviewing assessments, documents, anything to, I'm thinking of it like a student, right?
Sure.
So my kid comes home, they don't know what they're doing, someone has to help them, someone has to review, someone has to teach. teachers do that to our kids. You were here twice.
Right.
So our model, who helps them when you're not here? How do they revise their assessments if no one's reviewing it? Or are you reviewing it even when you're not here?
At the beginning, I was sent a bunch of documents to look at and give feedback on. Mark,
We've gone through, let me use the example of math assessments in terms of how we evolved from that. About 4 or 5 years ago, knowing that this was coming, we started leveling our assessments in terms of level. Parents would see this level 2, level 3, level 4 questions on there. And the way that we did that at the time is that we recruited an expert from Marzano Labs, Jan Hay, to review our initially provide some training, and also to, actually it was a different gentleman that came to provide the training, but anyway, so she gave us guidance because we sent our assessments off to her, and then the curriculum council, as we learned how to get better at these level assessments, reviewed all the assessments both for math and language arts. I think all the subjects went through all the different assessments. Lisa, you would remember going through those. At this point, just the volume of the assessments that we're again having to revise because of Common Core, that's why we need more consultant time from Fern and from Claren to provide that kind of input. And certainly what Ms. Winters has provided will be useful as well. So we knew this work needed to be done, but I think we're in a good position to do it.
So
You
no
never
one
answered
has,
her
so in
question.
essence, you're saying no one has been reviewing the work that they've done, because you said 4 or 5 years ago when we had Marzano, that was being done, but the Common Core standards didn't even come out then. So since then, who has been helping our teachers get where they need to be, analyzing their documents, analyzing the standards, making sure we're on target, looking at those assessments, making sure they're right? Who has been doing that? So for 3 years now, you've told us we've been preparing for this. Who has been helping them?
Well, I've answered this question to you before, and as we met with our curriculum council and asked the teachers, how do they want to approach this task? What the request was is that we want to learn about these by giving us the planning time that we need to do it. And we brought in a facilitator from the Curriculum Learning Institute to begin that work. And so for a period of, I think, 2 years, the time was spent digesting the standards to get us to the point that we have right now. A lot of work was done, and I think it put us in a place to really understand what the standards said and what needed to be done in terms of the alignment.
And I'm going to disagree with that, and I'll tell you why. Looking at this survey that the teachers filled out just last month, 75% of our staff said the question was, I have received sufficient training to align assessments to the Common Core state standards. 75% of our staff disagree or strongly disagree. So you're saying that they're doing it and they're confident. Just last month, 75% of our staff say that they have not received any training in this. That's a huge number. I mean, 80% of our staff has said they have not received training in implementing the Common Core. 80% of our staff. And this was something that was done in October of 2012. So how, my confusion is how, if it was done, implemented and aligned, 80% have not had the training in implementing, 74% have not had the training in teaching the Common Core standards. So I'm just very confused how you're saying that they're doing it, and they're confident and they're comfortable, and they're saying that they're not.
We're at the point now where we have put in a lot of training, and this is what, it's certainly not surprising.
But this was last month. This was just
Yes,
this
and I can
February.
answer that.
Okay.
We're at the place now that we've done the basic development. We've understood, to understand what the Common Core standards about. This is what was discussed at length with the Curriculum Council. The teachers were provided whatever opportunities that they needed to begin this work. And unequivocally, what teachers wanted was the time to plan with their colleagues, and that came out in the survey as well, that was one of the main things that they desired. Now, at this point, we definitely have a need for more training, and we've scheduled that, we put it in place, and I think that is a good course of action.
I think you need to really look at these surveys.
Yeah, I didn't see all that time.
61% said they've not had opportunities for professional development. So, I mean, you really need to look at these. And the curriculum council really needs to look at these as well, because, you know, most of this staff here does not even feel the curriculum council is effective. So I just think that it scares me that these poor teachers have to do all this work, aligning and implementing and writing assessments and writing curriculum, and they don't even really know how. Let me do one more. I have the education and experience.
You never
Wait,
answered
wait.
a question.
Mike,
I have the education and experience to write curriculum assessments. 55% disagree. More than half your staff says they're not educated or experienced in that. But they've been doing it for 4 years, so maybe we need to get them some help.
so the
They
question
can't do it on their
for the
own.
board now, not to cut you off, Gina, but I think there is agreement that we have work to do to become fully implemented, fully aligned. I don't think anybody disputes that, right? Fair statement?
So
So the question is, in the packet that Mark sent out, there is his proposal for a plan. The question is it a good proposal? Do we need more information on it? Do we want to spend more time on it? Whatever the case might be. But the question here for this board is, how are we going to close this gap? Because I agree with you, Jenny. Everything you've said is actually absolutely true and totally factual. But the thing is, that's where we are today. So how are we going to move forward? Because quite frankly, I have a kid going into 7th grade, some of you also have kids in school still as well, and I want them to be successful next year with Common Core. I want them to be successful in future years as they move into high school and everything else. I don't want to blow this opportunity. So I don't want to waste energy on how we got here. I want to know how we're going to get forward. And so that's my opinion. We all can disagree if you want. But I want to focus on how do we close this gap over the next 12 months.
So we're going to look at this plan here now? Or this one?
Yeah, and Mark, do you want to go through this?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, for the board, what I'm referring to is the document at the top. It says Math Common Core Implementation and Communication Activities Plan. And that's March 2014 through January 2015. Now, this plan I developed with my math coordinators, Melissa Pelisak and Peg Reardon, and with input from Claren Einfeld and from Fern Tribby. So the next scheduled date for staff development's April 4th, and you can see the topics that are there. One big emphasis on that day is going to be training for all elementary teachers in Math Common Core teaching strategies. As the board knows, the elementary school has been very involved with Regi Routman, which is basically an all-consuming staff development thing to bring us up to English language arts standards. And so the shift now is going to be more emphasis on math. So you can see that listed there. Then the middle school, there's 5 bullets there, and the second 2 about the Common Core assessments. We'll begin that process first at the middle school, and that'll be April 4th. Claren will be back again on May 15th. Be working primarily with the math committee, but also training again for elementary teachers in the Common Core standards. We're going to be looking at the sequencing for elementary. We still have some work to do with that. We think we got a good start on the majority of it, but as Ms. Tribby pointed out, not Tribby, calling you, I confuse you two, all these math people. Ms. Winters pointed out a few things, and also in Fern's report, mentioned some adjustments that we need to make. So we'll begin that work then on the 15th. Then I've included in there, the board will get a status report at the May meeting, and also subsequent to that, we'll continue to put information out to parents. On June 10th, since teachers will be here but not students, on that day, Claren will be back, and we're looking at that time to transition from the assessments to working on the curriculum maps and lesson unit plans, and that work will take place on that date. And then elementary will begin working more on their assessments, and at that point as well, we're going to be looking at our Common Core materials and see just where we are with that. Summer work, what we want to do is we want to wrap up all of our assessments prior to the beginning of the school year. So that'll be a good place to be in to start the year with those completed. And then on August 19th, both Fern and Claren will be back. That's no longer tentative, by the way. We've finalized those dates. And we'll be looking at curriculum maps, which is the progression after the assessments are done. And we'll make sure that we get one last look at all the assessments to start the year. Then on August 20th, the next day, Fern will be back working with the middle school students on curriculum maps. And that on that same day, the elementary teachers will be focused on English language arts. September 17th will be another status report to the board, bring the board up to speed on everything we've accomplished over the summer and up to that point. Again, parents will be receive a report as well, and I'm sure we'll begin repeating all the parent meetings that we've been conducting this year. Back on the 25th, actually I should point out here that we're making some changes next year in the way Curriculum Council functions, is that we need to have less Curriculum Council meetings and more time directed toward content areas, simply because we've got so much to do with math and English language arts. So that day is not an institute day. We'll have teachers subbed out, working on curriculum maps and also looking at our K lesson structure and unit planning. Then October 14th, another institute day. Both Fern and Claren will be back. By that point, we will be looking at pending board approval, STAR assessment for math data, and also we'll continue working with our K lesson structure and unit plans, and we'll determine the need for additional Common Core math materials at that point. The material part of it is kind of tricky because there's new things coming out now, and not all of it is created equal. Everything has got a Common Core label slapped on it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's good material. But we definitely will need to make a change from what we have, particularly in grades 3 through 6. January 20th, Institute Day, Fern and Claren, again, that's no longer tentative, will be back. And at that point, we're going to need to look again at math materials, plan for the park assessment, and if we have any loose ends left with curriculum maps or that kind of thing, we would certainly complete it by that time. And then again, training for all teachers on preparation for the park. And subsequent to that, the next day is a board meeting, so you'll get an update at that point, and then we'll see from there. So that's the plan now. I think it's...
Mark, one thing Ms. Tribby mentioned was coming back in to do co-teaching, curriculum planning. Where is that embedded in? Where's the co-teaching exercise? It seems a lot of institute days, but where?
It says April 4th and her report done.
Oh, that's what I'm sorry. Okay.
Is she coming on April 4th? Because it doesn't say it up here though.
Yeah.
Well, no, she did mention it this evening, if that's what you're referring to,
Oh, yeah.
next fall.
Oh, next fall, but I didn't see
Right,
that.
right.
And a lot of that we...
I'm not contradicting
Oh,
what
no,
you're
I
saying,
know.
it's there, but I'm saying
Is
that
she-
it was said for next fall
Is
as
she
well.
coming, are you coming April 4th?
No, I'm not. The state of Illinois for teacher retirement, I'm only allowed to work 100 days, and I'm at my max.
Oh, okay.
So
Just
that's,
you said
and
you
Claren Einfeld is phenomenal, and she and I have been talking a lot, so she'll be able to continue.
Mrs. Rack knows Claren, I approve.
I
And I am saying something, I know it's not open forum, but I feel that this is too important. Because we are lucky to have the people here helping us, but I'm gonna tell you right now, my concern, and I am concerned, like Fern only worked with the math committee. What about, I think every second grade math teacher needs to talk about the second grade Common Core standards. Every teacher needs to be trained in the math practices. So we're lucky we had her, but she just trained the math committee. I think Vern actually save your dates for us for next year, because I think we need another 20 dates added to this. I feel like we need grade level team meetings, all third grade teachers. Anyone that teaches third grade math needs a full day with Vern or Claire. I do not like this K-4 half-day professional development. You're not gonna get the magnitude of the change that's necessary. I don't know what the plan is, but I would like to see grade level team meetings. All math teachers need to be trained on their standards. You cannot put a secondhand piece of information that's so important on a committee that now has to release this information to other staff members. And I mean, and I don't even know if they had grade level meetings and took Vern's training to the next level, but secondhand information is not the way to go.
On April 4th, Sharon, that is going to happen, it'll start to happen. Claren is picking up where I've left off, where she will be working with all the teachers in the morning at the K-4, and then the 5.
But what I'm saying is I want just a day of first grade, a day of second. Like, I do not like this generic, and I will call it K-4 PD or 5A. What happens in kindergarten and fourth grade is so different. I mean, you guys, this is the biggest change we've had in years. I mean, we have to put some time into this. And, you know, again, it's like, I appreciate everybody's hard work, but I'm sorry. Look at my documentations. I thought this was done. I'm glad we're all realizing it's not done. But I think we need more time at grade levels.
Yeah, Doug can answer.
Ms. Winters, what do you think, from your perspective, what are kind of best practices?
I didn't hear any mention of training the whole staff on focus, coherence, and rigor, and particularly rigor, because rigor is really what's lacking in your curriculum documents. So, and when I talked to the committee members about that, you know, they were not aware of what the 3 aspects of rigor were. And I didn't hear any mention of training of that. Before you can do any scope and sequence work, before you can do any work on unit maps, you need to understand the rigor of each standard. And I didn't hear any mention of that in your plan. That would be the very first thing they should do. Because if they don't understand the standards, Mark, I'm sorry, but they ask really good questions, but there are things that they need to know. So that has to happen first. And I don't hear that in your plan.
Yeah, just to reiterate, as Fern mentioned, on April 4th, that is the day that all elementary teachers at each grade level will be getting trained. And then Doug, to your point, on September 25th, this
Hang on, Mark,
is,
it doesn't say that about focus, coherence, and rigor on April 4th. It doesn't say
Yeah.
anything about that on there.
Can I?
Or
on
individual
April-
grades.
Yeah, on April 4th, that's where the start was good, where they were going to begin working on, is understanding the definition of focus, rigor, and coherence. And that was spending the morning on just those 3 words and what they mean in relation to the Common Core and the expectations. And that's a start. It's a start. It's more than what existed
Can I ask,
before.
what is typical in other districts to spend on focus, coherence, and rigor? Is it beginning of a session in the morning? Do we spend a day? Do we spend a day by grade level? What is typical?
I've spent, I mean, I do 1 grade level at a time, because you not only zero in on what focus, coherence, and rigor mean, but they have to understand their focus, their
Yes.
coherence, and their rigor. And that is a very in-depth conversation.
So that should be 1 day per grade level, is what you're saying?
Minimally, yes. 1 day to start the conversation, and then you revisit it. You know, I've usually done 2 with a full grade level, where they spend the day learning what focus, coherence, and rigor are, analyzing it, we come back and revisit, and then we start looking at assessment for focus, coherence, and rigor. But they can't really design assessments, because they
Right.
won't be at the right levels of rigor until they understand their rigor.
Well, I guess that's my concern too. I think, Ms. Trivia, you mentioned, I think the words were assessments drive instruction. But we're talking on April 4th about teaching strategies, and our assessments clearly aren't done. And we don't seem to understand the terminology in any way, shape, or form. So are we skipping too far ahead rather than backing everything up and saying, let's start at square one and learn what we need to learn before we delve into all these other things? Because to me, teaching's the last thing. You know, I talked to other districts, scope and sequences first, curriculum math second, assessments come next, and then lessons. Well, I see scope and sequence work further down in the plan, curriculum maps further down in the plan. I see lessons before curricular maps, which doesn't really make sense to me in the flow of things. and again, I don't know who wrote this, I'm just speaking from conversations with other districts, that you have a map before you go down into the lessons. That's typically how it's done. But in our training, that's all out of order. So are we hodgepodging things together to put together a plan based on when people have time? Or is this a thoughtful plan that's going to get us, to Doug's point, where we need to be in fast forward mode by this time next year? Ms. Winters?
I don't think your plan is in the right order right now. I do think it can be done in time for the park assessments, but I think we would need to, it's not a coherent plan right now. Your flow is off. So,
Well, then I'd like to make a suggestion to the board. As part of our phase 2 audit, we had originally asked both our ELA auditor and our math auditor to come to us with a professional development plan. We forfeited that because we had Ms. Trivian District helping us at the same time. I guess I would like us to take a step back and ask Ms. Winters to put together a plan for us that can be executed. I guess I would also like to see one consistent person doing professional development so that there's that continuity through it. It would be like changing a teacher every month and not knowing what the other one has done.
Kim, I'm going to disagree, because sometimes you have people that do K2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think they're specialists. So, I feel I have all the confidence in the world for Fern in the middle school. Glad my kid's there. K5, it would hurt us to find a K5 professional development consultant. And that's where I'm saying I think with PD, you really do want to target grade levels. You really do. You don't want this generic K8 PD, which was, I think, what I am seeing on this paper and what I believe to be true with just, I'm going to tell you, half day. Fern, you're not a miracle worker. You're great, but it's like we need a lot more, and I think sooner than later.
Thank you, Jerry. All right. So one option on the table then is to bring Ms. Winters back to do the formal plan.
oh,
Sorry.
I don't know that I would want to do that in isolation. I think I would want to do that in conjunction with your staff. I think that,
Yeah.
I've only met your staff one time, but I think it needs to be collaborative.
Mhm.
This is me coming in and telling you what I think as an outsider.
So a better way to facilitate.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
And then if Fern's going to execute it, have her be a part of the process.
Okay.
Mhm.
No, I agree.
Yeah,
It'd be a
I
good
think
team
whoever's
effort.
going to be doing the PD should be a part of that process as well. And if you have two professional development providers, that's fine.
Can I ask, and I don't really care who answers, is Claire and Eifelt a K through, what did you say, K through 5?
Well, because our building is K4.
K4. Is she an expert at the elementary level? Because I would like to see someone who is, if she is not.
I spoke with her about her expertise, and she has actually taught math methodology for elementary grades. So I'm very confident in my discussion with her and her capabilities for working with elementary.
Did she teach those grades or just
I didn't
methodology
ask her
for
if she
college
taught
boards?
those grades. I was more interested in her knowledge of the methodology.
She's done a lot of work with ISBE. In fact, she used to work for ISBE, and then she broke off and formed her own consulting service. And she and I, we spoke yesterday afternoon, and she feels very confident, based off of her past work, in working with the K4 group.
She's done work in Flossmoor. I've worked under Claire in
So
Flossmoor.
she has experience working with K4?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
She knows math.
So then
Not exactly answering the
Well,
question.
I guess I would like,
Great.
we could probably
She'd
make
be
this,
great,
but
I'm fine, but I'm just want to make
Mark,
sure
can you
that-
look into it and
but our
see if she
teachers.
has K through 4 experience? Because I don't want someone who's at a higher level who we hire who does not help our elementary building. I think we need someone with that specific expertise.
Yes, I did talk at length with her because that was a question that I certainly had myself. And she explained a lot of work that she has done over the years, and I just have complete confidence that this is a good person to start with, and we'll see how it goes after the first couple of trainings. But I think it's the right choice.
Well, I don't
For
want to
now.
wait until we go through a few trainings and then determine she's not the right choice. So that's why I guess I'm asking, can we get a bio and a resume? And I want to see it in writing that she has this experience. I don't want to risk it. We've already not wasted because everyone put in a lot of work. We've already spent too much time guessing. We need to be dead on, aiming at that target right now. We cannot waste any more time. We have 1 year left. So if we can get something to prove to, even if it's just me, that she is qualified to do K through 4, that would be wonderful.
She's been doing staff development in some form for the past 20 years. I first met her back in 1992. That's when I was young.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you that she hasn't been doing staff development. I want to see K through 4.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so whatever we have that can prove that, that would be wonderful.
Be specific though, Kim, what are you looking for in K4? She taught K4 or she trained K4?
I would say train K.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, that's
Yeah,
what I'm
thank you.
driving at.
She's done it.
Because first I thought I heard you say thought, so.
Sorry, I may have, but
No, no
train is
worries.
probably the right.
Maybe that was my word.
I'm sorry?
That'd been my word.
No.
Lisa, any questions? No? Mark, anything?
No.
All right. There's one other issue to talk about in respect to this, unless there's any alternate suggestions to Kim's. One thing that's still open on our agenda is communication to the community. We have made some representations in the past that we are fully aligned and fully implemented. We're obviously not, so we need to figure out how we're going to communicate to the community for where we are today, what our next steps are going to be, and kind of what the right venue for doing that is. I mean, there's everything from posting on our website to having more parent forums or whatever the case might be. And again, I think part of this goes to this common vocabulary concept as well, getting parents up to speed on Common Core and what it means to their kids and what's different from what they're learning today and all that good stuff. Any suggestions as to the best way to approach this?
If I could begin with
Sure.
that, the one thing that's very challenging with this is trying to communicate this in written form. I certainly would apologize for any misuse of terminology through the communication that's gone out, but the point is always try to be as simple as possible about what we're doing and how we're doing it. What I've found from holding now, I think I'm on my 5th one next week for Common Core type meetings, is those type of forums are really necessary to be able to really convey what Common Core is about. We have a lot of things on the website about Common Core. There's a lot of resources that have been put out by either the state or the PT and all of that, but I think the most effective way with this, and I don't know how to get around it any other way, is to continue holding these well, it was lunch with the superintendent, or we had Carol Jago in the evening. She'll be back on May 12th. So I think that's the best way to, I mean, we'll still put out written information and all of that, but I think we have to still continue with the parent forums. People are interested. We've been getting lots of folks out for these kind of things, so I think that should be our main emphasis.
I'd like to see if we could use some of the examples Ms. Winters provided in her thing for the parents. I think those drove home to me the key differences between what we do today and where we need to be. And we're doing what we're doing for good reason, but okay, now what's it going to look like next year, right? I think some of those examples were telling for me as a parent.
I can tell you what some other districts have done, in that I did facilitate in one district where we actually had parent volunteers come in and we trained the parents to lead some activities. And when they went in and tried to lead, they saw how challenging it was for students to think on this higher plane with the higher cognitive skills. And so some of those tests where they actually took like almost a Common Core field trip, where the parents would lead an activity in multiple groups and get to see how the different groups were challenged to think. They realized that A, teaching is not as easy as they thought it was, and B, that the Common Core is not just about doing many problems, but it's about doing a few problems very deeply and doing a few tasks. So sometimes having the parents actually fully invested in the activities helps them to get that sense better than anything else.
Yeah.
I do think the board does need to send out communication, because we basically approved the goal and acknowledged that it was met, and now we're not really there. And I think we owe it to our community to say, you know, we're not where we thought we were. And we're sorry. And we're gonna work hard to get us to where we need to be. But we're not there yet. I mean, it's nothing wrong with, you know, admitting a mistake or whatever an oversight is and moving forward. But, you know, you gotta first admit that there's an issue.
Mark, thoughts?
Anything written should probably include, no,
Plan.
right, that's what I'm thinking. You know, say, hey, here's, now, I look at this and I say, the only thing that'll come up, if I was a parent receiving this, I would be like, okay, there seems to be an awful lot occurring in the first half of next school year.
Mhm.
And I'd be concerned about what's supposed to be done, actually taught in that
Right.
first half.
I have that same concern.
So I mean, that would be the only thing I'd say that we probably have to address if we sent out this calendar.
And I think one thing that I've just heard from parents recently is that their children's teachers have been missing a lot of classes lately. And I don't know what the reason is, but if any of these days happen to fall on instructional days versus, whatever we call institute days, we need to explain that to the community that, you know, why, whether
Enforced
teachers
March,
aren't.
right? Yeah.
What's that?
We're on forced march, basically.
Absolutely, yes.
I didn't hear what you said. What did you say?
There's a forced march to get to this point, so we have to do this. In other words,
Okay.
we're accelerating this because it has to get done. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Gina. I would like to see just a forthright communication to the parents. We did an audit because they may not know that. The reasons for doing it, the costs, the results, and the next steps in the plans, and just lay it all out there. This is how we're gonna get there with the timeline. There's no point in hiding it. It is what it is.
I'd like the whole board, though, to have the opportunity to approve what goes out.
Sure.
As
I
opposed to
agree.
just
Maybe it should come from the
a
whole board.
handful of people.
The whole board?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
fine.
I think the communication should come from the board.
So how about if Mark and I draft something, circulate to all of you for approval before we distribute? Does that make sense? And we'll try to sync it up with the plan, then we get the planning process done really quickly.
But if there are any revisions to the letter that take place, we all need to have the opportunity to see what the revisions are before it goes out.
Right, so
So we get the
ideally,
final,
this would
final
be.
to approve it before it goes out.
Ready for the board
Right,
meeting?
right.
Approve it at the board meeting?
You know, bring it to the board meeting.
Okay.
Yeah,
Now,
that'd be
that's
great.
our thing, that in the agenda.
Okay.
When are you looking for this draft of the plan then?
Well, it's Tuesday, right?
Today's
We're on
the
a forced
11th.
march here.
Yeah, today's the 11th, so if you had it to
I
us
should
by
read
the
the timeline,
10th.
I got a lot of things on the plate right now.
End of day,
What's feasible? Well, I have about 8 park tests to read, so maybe after those, I would say probably by next week, I can maybe meet with, now I don't know whether you want me to meet with some reps from the committee, or who you'd like.
I think it should include you, Fern, I think it should be Fern, yourself, Claren's available,
Yeah.
math committee, I mean, a couple, or at least there was Melissa, and who else helped with the
think
plan?
Patrick and Mrs. Reardon.
Mrs. Reardon, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually, I would point out that because of where we are and certain things that we've done, I think if you had more information, the sequence of events would make more sense, but that's a topic we can discuss later.
Well, I'd like to hear them.
He won't answer questions, he never
Well,
does.
I'm just wondering, like, what the
No, I'm
sequence of
I'm
events.
happy.
I asked him the same
I'm
questions
happy to.
twice and he never answered.
No, because like the sequence of events, like, if there's a method behind the plan, I think it would be good to hear that,
Let's hear it.
Oh, absolutely.
you know?
On April 4th, and this is feedback that I had received after holding meetings with all the grade level teams, is that they want this training all together. So that April 4th, now mind you, elementary and middle are two different places. We've got every classroom teacher at the elementary teaching math, and at the middle school, we have 4 teachers teaching math, so that's why it's different. So definitely, the number one thing that the elementary folks want is training all together, and then breaking it up by grade level, and K2, 3, 4, and that's, we think, the configuration that will work. With the middle school, when I talked with Peg on the assessments, that we've got quite a bit of work done on those already, because we have already leveled those, and we think that that can be done, majority of that work by the beginning of the end of the year, and we'd like to just get that done, and then we can focus the change then over to working on the curriculum maps and the lesson plans. And that was their preference.
You changed the assessment since the documents you sent to me, or?
No, we haven't started to revise the assessments at this point.
Oh, okay, so, because if you have a different version than what I looked at, then I don't have most.
No, the point being is that because we have already leveled the assessments into level 2, 3, and 4, that we think we can do that work fairly quickly at the middle school. And that was their preference, to do that work first.
What do you mean level them in 2, 3, and 4?
Isn't that Marzano speak, not Common Core speak?
Well, it's similar in terms of higher order thinking skills, and that's the whole part of it, is that we need to have more application or conceptual type questions. I'm just agreeing that that's the course that we need to take. And according to the input from the teachers, is that they would like to work on that already on May 15th, and to continue working on that through the summer.
And I
so
know
that
I'm not
work
supposed
gets
to
done.
talk, but I think you have to start with the scope and sequence, because if you're gonna be switching around topics, your assessments are based upon that scope and sequence. So you have to have a Common Core aligned scope and sequence based from the park blueprints. So I don't know if that's ever been taught, what's on the performance base versus the end of the year, but don't do anything till there's a scope and sequence that's aligned to park.
Well, we actually talked about it when I came in for the audit. I think some of us
Okay,
already had some of
okay.
that conversation.
But, yeah, I just can't see doing assessments, because then Lyle kind of had this problem, where after those park blueprints came out, things that they were teaching in this unit, now they had to move down here, because it was only on the end of the year assessment, not the performance-based. So I'm just trying to avoid a redo of assessments for a fourth time. So I really strongly recommend a scope and sequence aligned to the park documents as step one.
Can I suggest, then, if the motion, there's someone wants to make a motion to the board to hire Ms. Winters to facilitate the development of a plan from the beginning,
Okay, thank you.
utilizing Ms. Trivy as well as the core members of the teachers and administrators to make this happen. I think that's a reasonable motion.
I'll make the motion, but I can't repeat it.
You know, just second it.
Okay, then I'll second it.
Get
that off the
video.
I'm just happy there's a plan. Thank you.
Mrs. Barker?
Yes.
Mrs. Howe?
Yes.
Mr. Mobley?
Yes.
Mrs. Nelson?
Yes.
Mr. Gilman?
Yes. So that'll be the approach going forward. Timing, you tell us how we get everybody together, what the logistics are. As far as initial communication, we'll talk at the next board meeting about what the communication is going to be, and it may be as simple as saying the plan will follow in the next X number of weeks or whatever based on the schedule. I think as long as we all agree on what the language is in the next meeting, then we can communicate to the community at large and tell them where we're at. Does that make sense to everyone?
And I have to thank Mr. Glumko, because I feel that that's the reason for us here. So, thank you, John.
Thank you, Sharon. Okay. All right,
And unfortunately, anyone good, they're going to know me. So, we want good people here. They're all going to know me, Dr. Fred Stork.
all right, so that concludes the core part of the agenda. We can now move back into open forum. If anybody has any closing remarks to make? Yes,
I
please.
have several questions sitting here. As a concerned community member, taxpayer, advocate for students.
Can you
okay?
introduce yourself?
My name is Deborah Sikowski. Doug, you had said that you don't want to revisit the past, you want to plan moving forward. Every good businessman knows you need to know where you've been in the past before you need to know where you're going, because you might end up in the same place. And just listening to this plan that is being presented at this meeting, you're only going to end up right back in the same place you are. So what I want to know, and another thing a good business person knows, is accountability. in 2010 and 2012, we were told we're Common Core aligned, we're Common Core aligned, we're Common Core aligned. Writing a communication to the community in 2014 saying we're not, I want to know who's going to be held accountable. Is it the superintendent? Is it the board of directors? Is it the curriculum committee? What? And look, so here's the question. What are the credentials of the curriculum committee? And I'd also like to know, Fern, have you worked for the Illinois State Board of Education for Common Core?
No, I haven't, not for ISBE.
Okay. So what are your credentials so that we don't end up the same place we do as we did in 2010?
I'm currently a consultant for DuPage County Regional Office of Education in the area
Okay.
of mathematics.
Okay. So I don't understand. So who's going to be held accountable?
So, I will answer those questions briefly and break the protocol to do so. But a couple things real quick. One is, the purpose of this agenda was to figure out where we are today and then make a decision on how we're going to move forward. There are other agendas later in this year to talk about accountability for failure of meet goals and things like that. So those things, it's registered, understood, moving on. The immediate concern of this agenda is to fix this problem. Okay? I think Ms. Winters and Ms. Trivia have both done a great job kind of telling us where we're at today and giving us a good sense for what needs to be done. We at least have an idea where we can start from, and that's key. As far as 3 or 4 years of history, you know, it's something that we do need to explore in terms of accountability, but in terms of this agenda, no. It's something, this agenda is focused on getting better. And we owe it to our teachers, we owe it to our students, and to everybody in this community that we got to get this thing better and get it right as soon as possible, and not spend a lot of energy on casting blame at this point in time. There are other venues to talk about accountability. This is not it today.
So blame and accountability are two separate things. I want
Understood.
somebody held accountable.
Fair enough. Go ahead.
My name is Angelica Kral. As someone that is a relatively new parent to this district, we just moved to the district 2 years ago. When we met people, we were told that, you know, this is a phenomenal district, our math curriculum parallels Vineta and WOMAT and Singapore math, and, you know, we're just fantastic. I'm a little upset to find we're not so. I am also noticing in Ms. Trivia's report that she compares us to several other districts and says we're doing better than them. I would hope that we will aim to be where we should have been with the excelling districts, with the high-performing districts, and not just rest on our laurels and say we're better than so many other districts. And I would hope that would be the aim, to get back where we were supposed to have been.
Oh, no, sit down.
My name is
No,
Michael Rack,
no.
and I just want to thank you guys for setting a plan. And it's a shame that we presented a plan today. It didn't make sense. And I'm wondering why that is. I think we have someone at the forefront of our leadership. I don't know who leads this district with the Common Core implementation, but obviously whoever has been in charge so far has no idea what's going on. So I hope we get to the root of this. You say there's going to be a point where there's going to be accountability and blame. Is it going to be someplace, how about having a town hall meeting where we can ask questions and get answers? I mean, I've come to board meetings, ask questions, and no one will answer you. So for you to say, okay, there's going to be accountability and blame, that's great, but I can never get an answer from the board on what their feelings are.
But I'd like to thank the board for letting me
Right.
speak today. So
Right.
thank you, and thank
And-
you.
and-
And the teachers for all your hard work, because
Right.
I think I can't say that enough. You know, I just feel that a lot of support's taking place everywhere, but I mean, obviously, we do have a great staff, and we have great students, and I do think that this is gonna get fixed right away.
Right.
But, I do appreciate just the time for letting me, interject, because that's not a common practice here.
Right.
But this is something that's been bothering me, and
And I'm glad that-
I feel confident that we are moving forward in the right direction. Thank you, Mr. Rack, sit down.
And I'm glad it's been going on, that we have been getting some interaction from the board. So I just want to thank the teachers. I mean, their work has been phenomenal, but they've had no leadership, and that's a real problem. And I hope the board takes that into consideration as to who's in charge of this district, who's in charge of monitoring what happens. So I hope you guys all sit down and think about this hard, because it's very important. It's disturbing to me when I sit here and I watch Kim ask the same question twice, and he doesn't answer the question. He's famous for that. And I just heard on the news about how to tell if people are lying. They change the subject. They don't answer your question. So I think that's one thing that I find very interesting.
I just have one comment to what you had mentioned. You said that there were
Can you
three
introduce yourself,
principals
please?
that, I'm John Borelli, I'm a parent. That you mentioned that there were three criteria that the teachers didn't mention to you that you thought they should. Is that because they were never provided the materials, or do we not have the materials? I mean, I'm not sure what I didn't write it down what you said they were, but.
Well, the three documents that I was looking for were the park model content frameworks, the park evidence tables, and the progression documents. And I wouldn't know. I don't know.
So, I mean, is that something that teachers, were you given that information? No? So you didn't, okay. I just didn't know. I didn't know why they wouldn't give you the information if they.
Can I ask a question? Is that
Because they
possibly
wanted time.
protected in some way, or
Oh,
is that
gosh, no, that's
accessible
public.
to everyone?
That's park. That's the information.
So that's
from park.
online somewhere, or how would we get that as a
To
district?
be honest, the superintendent's memo, the state superintendent's memo constantly updates districts on when new documentation comes out. So that's usually the first place someone would get that information. Sometimes they get it from the regional office, because the regional offices, provide, at my area, I send out an email, there's some new information from park, to my constituents. So you would hear from your local regional office or from the state superintendents.
Anyone could join their listserv. Anyone in this room could join the park listserv.
Thank you. All right, any other comments? All right, having said that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting at 8:47.
Have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned.
Aye.